Rahim went to Russia last weekend. He wanted to talk about it, so we're going to talk about it. He saw the Murat Gassiev and Joyce, hopefully having the last fight of his career in the co-main event. And he saw things, he covered things, things happened. Murat Gassiev is the WBA heavyweight champion now, I believe the regular version. I don't know. Rahim, help me out here. Did Usyk wind up?
Now.
He's the full champion. All right, so he's the super WBA champion. Right, Murat Gassiev, who, I covered back in the day when he was funny story. Not funny, but he was training up at Big Bear with Gennady Golovkin, and Golovkin was always hard for me to actually get to talk and to interview, even when I drive up to Big Bear to go see Abel Sanchez at the Summit. And Gennady, when he really opened up to me, was being a translator for Murat Gassiev. And that's when Gennady was the big bro. He was translating from Russian to English for me so that I could interview Murat Gassiev and give his guy some shine. Antonio Leonard with Jay Prince came up to the gym to scope out Murat Gassiev, who had some sparring that night. I know what happens in the gym stays in the gym. This is a long time ago. He was flat and kind of didn't impress. I mean, he was built like, strong as a mule, Murat Gassiev. He is a strong motherfucker. Even coming up from the cruiserweight division, he is just very strong and heavy-handed. But he was just flat and kind of going through the motions. The sparring session was like at 9 o'clock at night in the mountains, and Antonio Leonard came and went. And nothing ever came of that partnership. But I've known Gassiev for a long time, and didn't count him out against Alexander Usyk when they fought for the unified titles at cruiserweight. Usyk, that was the beginning of me knowing Usyk was really the real deal. When he handled Gassiev in decisive fashion, because I know how powerful Gassiev is. He's still undersized in terms of height. He's very straight up and down. I don't think a Moses Itauma struggles with him. I even think Fury at this point might still be able to handle a Gassiev. But tough guy. Joyce, there was a humanity to him saying no mas in that. That's a fighter who's more than earned his right to call it a day through all the punishment he's withstood with his once incredible punch resistance. But, you as an American, well, now a Brit, but, an American being in Moscow, you got a lot of, even from me, be safe, Rahim, be safe out there. And then you said it was all good. It really wasn't bad at all going to Russia.
Well, I'm a global citizen, Sean.
Right.
I've found my way around the world in many, many different circumstances, political environments, and every time I've traveled anywhere, there is nothing that can supplant or replace or substitute for first-hand account. Just seeing for yourself what it is. Let's start with the boxing. We're not going to go into the other bit until we deal with what I thought was of significance in the ring on last Saturday night. While there wasn't a ton of attention on that fight, I do believe there was significance to what happened in Moscow on Saturday night. Not the least of which, the end of Joyce's career in a way that our community would often excoriate a fighter for. I mean, the no mas of it all, and that's what we did get. We have to be straight up. Like, it was as no mas gets. You see in the middle of a round, a fighter who hasn't even been knocked down, who isn't injured, who has no other reason to stop the fight than he does not want to go for this anymore. Like, this is no longer where he wants to be. He's not interested in taking or giving any more punches. Mm-hmm. This, for him, is over. And he alone, not the corner, not the ref, not the doctor, but he alone says, enough. He waves the fight off. That's a cardinal sin in boxing, and the kind of scarlet letter that the fans and analysts alike will never let you forget. In this case, however, I think we as a collective community need to take a deep breath, calm yourself and your nerves, get your scar tissue and childhood trauma out of the way from seeing your best fighter maybe at some stage in life quit, or relating yourself to being the fighter in the ring and thinking if you see your favorite guy or somebody else quit, that it somehow means you've quit or the country he's from is quit or whatever it is that makes this so personal for all of us that we stay in a sport like boxing. You also have to, beyond humanity, have some just common sense. Joe Joyce gave everything that he had and could do in the sport of boxing right up until that very last second. I hope that is the last second. I hope that he decides from that moment and for the rest of his life that he's had enough boxing. And that we as a community salute him, say thank you for the great nights, thank you for your service to the sport, and congratulate him when we see him on giving all he had. When fighters say, oh, I'll die in there. You know what I mean? Like, you got to carry me out. That's one way to go without having your heart stop. He fought until he couldn't fight anymore. Going into that fight, plenty of us would have been like, Joe's washed, Joe's done. Like, you know, this kind of opponent he should be able to beat, but is it worth even the battering he would take in beating the opponent that he was up against? I would have said no. But once he signed on to the fight, he showed up in Moscow. I did an interview right before. You can't say that to a guy 24 hours before he stepped into the ring. You got to accept his decision, as I have done with Derek Chisora now multiple times over the last 3 years when I thought he should have been done 3 years or so ago even, right? A man has his autonomy. He has his right to live out his life and chase glory until the very last breath if that's what he decides to do. And I have changed on this subject. I used to be like, man, it's time to hang him up and try to convince fighters this should be the last one and get on podcasts and get on broadcasts and be like, we shouldn't even support him and blame the promoter for putting the fight on. I have evolved from that position. I believe now that, yes, the fighter ultimately is the one who should have the say-so. And if you are able to pass a medical and you can get a fight where people are willing to buy a ticket or tune into the station, and that's where you want to be, you should have the right to be there, regardless of what I think or whoever thinks you should be done. Joe Joyce took agency in that moment and decided that he should be done. So in the same way that I want to say a guy has the right to fight on until he doesn't want to fight anymore, we should also have the grace to give them the right to say, I don't want to fight on anymore, without making that some kind of disgrace for the rest of their career or even for another second when you've been in there the way Joe Joyce has. This isn't a guy 15 fights in a world title matchup where we've paid tons of money to see this and he just decides he's not going to give the crowd what he promised. No, this is a guy who's found the end, and sometimes you retire in boxing and sometimes boxing retires you. In this case, I actually think Joe Joyce retired from boxing maybe seconds before boxing retired him. If he had taken, maybe he knows if he had taken one more punch, that's it. Maybe that scrambles the eggs for good. Maybe that puts him down into a coma. He walked out of the ring with his hand raised. Like, he walked out like celebrating his career, not ignoring the loss in the moment. I liked seeing that. I hope we as a community will respect that and look at him in that light. He's done all that he could do. Don't ask for more. And I would thank him and credit him for having the courage in the moment to say, not one more punch. That's it for me. I'd rather that than be talking about whether or not Joe has woken up from his coma or talking about another tragic end in boxing, even if it's 5 years from now. Whatever he saved himself in that moment, he deserves the right to save himself from, and we should credit him for saving us from a worser end and having to watch what could potentially happen when you take just one more punch.
Yeah, that moment, short of death or short of permanent brain damage, which unfortunately, given his style, may very well be a thing later on in his life that does catch up to him because of the style he fought in. But short of a life-threatening night at the hospital or worse, death, which has happened plenty of times in boxing, that moment of him waving himself off as a man who has been battered, mercilessly in the later half of his career is the poster child for why guys like Andre Ward stepped away when they did. Tim Bradley stepped away when he did. Sean Porter stepped away when he did, and Lennox Lewis, and on and on and on and on. Floyd. That's exactly what they never even wanted to get to that point, or even anywhere close to that point he was at. And my heart goes out to Joe Joyce, and I think in a way there's a beautiful vulnerability to it, a very human element to how he had to end it there. There comes a point where we should all be more than satiated with what the guy has had to receive to get to that point where it's acceptable to say you've had enough. I think he's been well beyond that point. I think he took too much punishment in his career. And there is a beautiful human vulnerability to a man as tough as he has proven himself to be over so many different fights, and knocking out two guys that went on to that have been heavyweight champion like Joe Parker and Daniel Dubois, to just say, I've had enough. It shows that even the toughest of men can be broken in boxing. So, yeah, my heart goes out to him and my salute to him, and I hope he has a healthy rest of his life where he gets to enjoy the fruits of his very tough labor in his career as a fighter.
Gassiev, being WBA world champion, being elevated to that status from regular champion because of the vacating of all belts by Usyk, I don't begrudge when the champion refuses to fight his mandatories and vacates all the titles. And I think where those titles go, whoever's in line to get them at that stage legitimately should be regarded as the champion of that sanctioning body, and also should need to solidify said championship, or as you might say, consummate the marriage by defending that thing one time. If you get elevated and then you lose your first defense, there may be an asterisk for me. But that first defense came along in immediate time for Gassiev, a fight that was a hometown fight against a fighter that, is certainly not a household name or even has, global class of recognition, but it's set the stage for what I believe the IBA is looking to do in Moscow, and what we might see across the heavyweight division going forward in all these different pods. We've got a race now on to see who will emerge the next heavyweight guy to beat. And whoever's got some hardware is going to be, by definition, in the conversation, because that next guy is going to want to collect hardware, which is why I like 4-belt era in boxing, and I like, if it's done properly, the idea that a fighter needs to go around and collect those belts from said champions to prove that he is, in fact, the unified and then undisputed champion of that division. Gassiev having a piece of that, Russia having a piece of that, Moscow having an arena full of Russians who are not just there to drink champagne or to socialize with their friends. These are actual fight fans. And as I've said, I've been around the world. I've been to China, Macau. I've been to Saudi. Now I've been to Moscow. Obviously, I've been in all different cities in America. I've been to London. I've been to Ireland. I've been around the world and seen fight communities from all different languages, cultures, and perspectives and socioeconomic classes. Moscow Russian boxing fans are legit. They're there for the fights. They know the fighters. They've got regional fighters there who are stars. They've got guys who we've never heard of on a global level that they support and back and show up to watch. And now they've got a legitimate world champion who can defend in his home country, while the news and the politics and the war around his country are not helpful, to say the least, and certainly causing quite a bit of strife into whether or not you want to go to Russia, if that is some kind of tacit support of the political position of the Russian government, if you're somehow, by participating in a fight there, putting yourself in that conversation. I say no, and consistently so. It's not because I just went there. As I've said, I've gone around the world in different communities with governments with whom I disagree. However, I don't think the athletes should be punished necessarily for their government's position. Now, in this case, and the reason I can point to this as consistent is because we had the conversation about Bivol and Beterbiev, ages ago, when these guys were potentially not going to be able to even get world title fights and defenses and couldn't go and have their fights in Russia, even though Bivol has now turned that down, and we know. But the point I was making way back then is that these guys deserve the right to fight and to defend championships and to challenge for championships, and their fan base, their community, deserves the right to see their best warriors at their best in the sport and shouldn't be punished for what a government that they have no control over and the decisions that are being made at that level shouldn't make an athlete have to wait out his prime years and deny them opportunity while the politics of the world works itself out. I always found that to be a real hardship on athletes who have such a finite amount of time to be at their best and to accomplish their most, when the governments that control their societies are now dictating whether or not they can compete as athletes in their sport. Now, to varying degrees, whether or not that athlete becomes a vessel of the government and how much the government itself is involved in putting on said athletic performances and stuff like that, all that, yes, can be a part of the conversation and create some different styles of nuance. The Olympics, I think, is also a different kind of platform where, again, these athletes have a very finite amount of opportunity to perform, and to what degree your politics in the government play a role in the athlete himself can create a real conversation around whether or not an athlete can function independently. In this case, I do, and from what I've seen, there were no politics in that ring or in that arena. These fighters were not fighting for the Russian government. They were fighting for their careers. They were fighting for world champions. They were fighting for purses. They were fighting for opportunity. And so that is what I'm about. That is what I do support. That is what I want to see continue. And I think because this venue out in Moscow and Gassiev being, a real player in the heavyweight division, we're going to see more fights there. And I'm interested to see what he chooses to do and just how often they can have these events right there in Moscow. So I went. I wanted to see what it was for myself. I was dissuaded by family, friends alike, news outlets, media personalities, inundated on the socials about what was happening in the city, not even the broader country. They were saying in Moscow, drone attacks, they're bombing the gas facilities, that drones are striking. The war, read a headline where it said the war front has moved to the capital of Russia, which is Moscow. And when I actually went on my own, myself, to go and cover and work that fight, there simply was none of that in evidence. I believe the people there were having a good time in the streets, in the arena. I spent a handful of days there on my own, no political minder, no shielding me from at least having the freedom to roam the city. I never left outside of Moscow, but what I did in the plane before we landed, it had to circle the city because they needed some extra time to find a runway to land on. So I got a bird's eye view of the entirety of Moscow. There were no plumes of black smoke or fires or drones blowing shit up. It was a peaceful experience. It was a same kind of athletic competition that I've seen everywhere else around the world. It happened just like it would happen any place else. All the pieces were there. The people were not in some kind of peril. I got in and out of there essentially effortlessly. I had no issue with the government, and I appreciate that is not the totality of the country. I literally can speak to nothing outside of the city of Moscow, which is the only part I saw, and then the event that I participated in. But as far as that specific place in the country, and the event that I attended and the days that I was there, where I went to the Kremlin, I went to the Red Square, I went out to dinner, I went out to see shows. Like, I did the things that I would do in any other city in the world if I had an opportunity, and it was all peaceful, it was all enjoyable, it was all easy, effortless, and really without any evidence of conflict. Even though this country is definitely at war, there was no evidence of that in Moscow. That is just a fact. This is not a political statement or my support in any way of any government agenda or being anti any government. I'm just telling you, as a person or a fight fan, a person who could go to a place and see what it is happening on the ground. There's a lot of fear mongering around what's happening in that city of Moscow that at least was not evident last week. That was not the truth, and it was kind of shocking to me, because just what had been said and what had been taken as fact was in such contradiction to the reality of what I experienced. So I believe boxing can happen there, should happen there for the sake of the fighters. If they've got a world champion who wants to fight there, why shouldn't he be able to fight there? If Bivol changes his mind and decides that he wants to defend there, why shouldn't he be able to defend there? If Beterbiev wants to continue his career there, let these guys fight, and let the government do their fighting on their own terms, in their own way, and don't let that disrupt these athletes who have such a finite amount of time to be excellent.
Yeah, I said a year and a half ago, go fight in Russia. So now they're fighting in Russia.
Right.
This is happening.
Yeah, in the ring, in that kind of fight. Those are the fights that we're interested in, that we cover.